The screams of the dying were a symphony of despair on Chthonius Secundus, a sound that etched itself onto the very soul of Sergeant Kalen. His breath hitched, tasting ash and blood, as another cultist, eyes wide with feral glee, charged from the smog-choked ruins. The ceramite plate of his Imperial Guard flak armor, scarred from countless skirmishes, felt like a flimsy shield against the tidal wave of fanaticism. Plasma fire hissed overhead, carving momentary paths through the perpetual gloom, only to be swallowed by the next wave of darkness. "Hold the line, you pathetic wretches," Kalen bellowed, his voice raw, barely audible over the din of battle. He brought his battered lasgun up, its power pack almost depleted, and vaporized the charging cultist's head in a flash of blinding light. The body hit the ground with a wet thud, already forgotten as three more fanatics vaulted over the rubble, their crude blades glinting. This was it. The Emperor's light had faded from this cursed world, replaced by the sickening glow of warp-spawned energies. Hours ago, the initial planetary defense forces had been shattered. Now Kalen's battered platoon, remnants of the Chthonian PDF, were the last desperate bulwark against a horde that seemed to have materialized from the very depths of hell. They were meant to buy time for the civilian evacuation ships, but the ships were long gone, and the horde kept coming. A shrill, guttural shriek pierced the air, closer now. Kalen risked a glance over his shoulder. Trooper Alara, a fresh-faced recruit barely out of basic training, lay sprawled against a crumbling wall, her leg grotesquely twisted, her eyes wide with terror. A hulking, mutated beast, all sinew and claw, towered over her, its maw dripping with ichor. "No!" Kalen roared, but it was too late. He emptied the last of his lasgun charge into the creature, the energy bolt sparking uselessly against its armored hide. The beast swiped, and Alara's scream was abruptly cut short. Rage, cold and absolute, washed over Kalen. They were all going to die here. For what? For an emperor who seemed to have abandoned them. He threw his now useless lasgun aside, drawing his combat knife, its blade dulled from countless kills. He knew it was futile, but he would go down fighting. He would take as many of these twisted horrors with him as he could. Just as the beast turned its attention to Kalen, its eyes glowing with malevolent hunger, a flicker of light unlike any he had ever seen tore through the sickly purple sky. It was too fast for an orbital strike, too bright for a flare, too sudden for anything he could comprehend. It was a searing, incandescent point of pure white, descending like an avenging star. It struck the ground with a thunderous impact, not 50 meters from Kalen. The very air shrieked, compressed and expelled in a colossal shockwave that threw cultists, rubble, and even the monstrous beast into the air like discarded toys. Kalen was flung backward, his head hitting the unforgiving concrete with a jarring crack. Darkness threatened to consume him, but the sheer force of the event, the deafening roar and the blinding flash, kept him clinging to consciousness. He lay there, stunned, ears ringing, blood trickling from a cut above his eye. The world around him was momentarily silent, save for the faint crackling of fires and the groans of the cultists, who had not been outright disintegrated. A crater, impossibly deep and perfectly circular, now marred the landscape where the light had struck. A plume of fine dust and smoke rose into the sky. Then, through the settling dust, a figure emerged from the center of the impact zone. It was a man. Just a man. No power armor, no ornate robes, no bionics. He wore a simple yellow jumpsuit, a pair of red gloves and red boots. And he was bald. Perfectly, impossibly bald. He stood there, completely unfazed, as if he had merely stepped out for a stroll. He dusted off his jumpsuit with a bored expression. Kalen stared, trying to reconcile the impossible. This civilian had just walked out of an impact that had vaporized reinforced concrete and thrown mutated abominations into the stratosphere. His mind, trained for war and steeped in the grim reality of the Imperium, simply refused to process it. The cultists, those who had survived the initial shockwave, slowly began to stir. Their fanaticism, momentarily stunned, flared anew as they spotted the new arrival. They pointed, shrieked, and then, with renewed fervor, charged. Another false prophet. One screamed, its voice raw. Blood for the blood god. The bald man sighed, a sound of utter disinterest that carried clearly in the suddenly quieted battlefield. He turned his head slowly, taking in the charging horde with an almost weary expression. He scratched his chin. "Oh man," he muttered, his voice surprisingly normal, almost bored. "I was just looking for a convenience store. This isn't Z City, is it?" He didn't wait for an answer. As the first cultist, a hulking brute wielding a rusty chain axe, lunged at him, the bald man simply extended his right arm. It wasn't a punch, not really. It was more of a casual flick. The cultist, chain axe and all, didn't just fall. It exploded. A crimson mist, bone fragments, and tattered rags burst outwards, showering the surrounding cultists. Silence. Then, a collective gasp of disbelief from the remaining cultists. Their fanaticism, for the first time, wavered. Kalen, still propped up against the rubble, felt his jaw go slack. He had seen Space Marines in action, witnessed the devastating power of a battle brother in full fury. But this was different. This was beyond anything he had ever conceived. The bald man looked at his gloved hand, then at the lingering crimson mist, and sighed again. "Seriously? Already getting blood on my suit. This always happens." The cultists, their courage returning in a wave of hysterical terror and renewed zealotry, began to charge again, but with less coordination, more desperation. They came from all sides, a chaotic flood of blades, axes, and snarling teeth. The bald man moved. He didn't seem to fight, not in the way Kalen understood it. He simply existed, a blur of yellow. Every contact was an eruption of gore, a sickening pop, a flash of pulverized matter. A cultist swung a polearm. The bald man ducked and the weapon shattered against an unseen force field around him, the cultist's arm snapping at the elbow from the recoil. Another tried to stab him. His fist, moving with impossible speed, went through the cultist's chest, leaving a gaping, smoking cavity. It was over in seconds. What had been a charging horde was now nothing but a grisly tableau of broken bodies, pulverized flesh, and crimson splatters painted across the ruined landscape. Not a single cultist remained standing. The silence that followed was absolute, punctuated only by the distant crackle of burning buildings and the heavy thud of Kalen's own racing heart. The bald man stood amidst the carnage, utterly still. He wiped a microscopic speck of something off his shoulder. "Well, that was annoying," he mumbled, then looked around, his gaze finally settling on Kalen. Kalen, still in a daze, watched him approach. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to run, but his legs wouldn't obey. This man, this anomaly, was more terrifying than any warp creature he had ever encountered. He radiated no malice, no dark power, only a profound, almost cosmic boredom. The bald man stopped a few feet away. "Hey," he said, his voice flat, "do you know where the nearest grocery store is? I'm all out of specials for dinner." Kalen blinked. He tried to speak, but no words came out. He just pointed a trembling finger at the devastation. You just..." The bald man shrugged. "Oh, that? Just some thugs. They were making a lot of noise. Do you know where I can get some crab legs? I heard they were on sale." Kalen finally found his voice, a choked whisper. Crab legs? "This is a war zone!" "You just annihilated an entire cultist horde with your bare hands." "Yeah, well, someone had to," the bald man replied, completely unfazed. They were interrupting my thought process about what to have for dinner. "So crab legs?" Before Kalen could respond, a new sound began to rumble from the distance, a deeper, more guttural roar than any cultist. The ground began to vibrate. Kalen's eyes widened in horror. He knew that sound. He had heard it in nightmares. "Get down!" Kalen screamed, scrambling to his feet, ignoring the searing pain in his head. "Demons! Chaos spawn!" The bald man looked in the direction of the sound, a faint curiosity in his expression. "Oh, good," he said. "More strong opponents, maybe. I hope they're stronger than those last guys." That was too easy. Then they emerged. Not from the shadows, but from the very air itself, rent and tearing, as if reality itself was peeling back. Hulking, grotesque forms, wreathed in warp energy, claws extended, teeth gnashing, beasts of pure nightmare, their flesh writhing, their eyes glowing with infernal fire. They numbered in the dozens, led by a colossal, multi-limbed creature, its body a sickening fusion of muscle, bone, and jagged blades. A greater demon of chaos, a lord of change, perhaps, or something far worse. Kalen watched frozen as the demonic horde poured into the ruins. Despair, cold and crushing, gripped him. This was the end, the final insurmountable wave. Even the bald man surely could not face this. The bald man, however, seemed to perk up slightly. He murmured, a hint of something resembling interest in his tone. That one looks kinda tough. Maybe. He stepped forward, away from Kalen, meeting the gaze of the charging demonic host. Kalen could only stare, heart hammering against his ribs, as the impossible man in the yellow jumpsuit prepared to face the unholy might of chaos itself. This wasn't just a battle, it was the end of the world, and a bald board man was standing at its center. The lead greater demon let out a shriek that rattled the bones in Kalen's chest, a sound that twisted the very fabric of the air. It was a challenge, a declaration of intent, a roar of absolute supremacy. The demon surged forward, its many limbs a whirlwind of bladed fury, its psychic presence radiating pure, concentrated malevolence. Lesser demons followed, a snarling wave of destruction. The bald man didn't flinch, he just stood there, his red gloves a stark contrast against the grim background of the ruined city. He raised his right fist, slowly, deliberately. There was no theatrical flourish, no building of energy, no visible surge of power. Just a simple, almost lazy movement. Then he punched. It wasn't a normal punch, it was a force of nature. The air in front of his fist shattered, not merely displaced, but utterly obliterated. A perfect expanding sphere of pure concussive energy ripped through the demonic horde. The greater demon, caught at the very epicenter, didn't even have time to shriek. Its form, which had seemed so solid and terrifying moments before, simply ceased to exist. It wasn't ripped apart, it was wiped from reality, leaving only a shimmering, violet afterimage that quickly faded. Behind it, the lesser demons were caught in the wake. Some were flattened into thin, crimson smears against the ground. Others were atomized, their chaotic forms dissolving into nothingness, not even leaving behind the usual warp residue. The shockwave, unimpeded by the now absent demons, continued its outward journey, leveling more of the already crumbling ruins, creating new craters in the devastated landscape. Kalen, thrown back again, found himself staring at a newly carved canyon where the horde had been. The stench of ozone filled the air, replacing the reek of demon flesh. The sky above, moments ago oppressive and dark, seemed to have been momentarily bleached, a stark pale grey against the violent sunset. Silence descended once more, thicker, heavier than before. The only sound was Kalen's ragged breathing and the distant whisper of the warp, now utterly bereft of its demonic inhabitants. The bald man lowered his fist. He squinted at the horizon, where the last vestiges of the impact faded. Well, that was a little better, he mused, a hint of disappointment still in his voice. But still, it's not really a challenge if they all go down in one punch, is it? He scratched his chin again. Maybe I should have used a serious punch for that big one. But then, I'd have to fix my hair afterwards. He sighed. Man, I really wanted to find a good sale on vegetables too. Kalen could only stare, his mind reeling. Demons, greater demons, creatures of immense power and malevolence, eradicated by a single casual blow. The bald man, this impossible figure, was not just strong, he was an existential paradox. He had no warp signature, no psychic presence, no obvious technological augmentation. He was just him. You, Kalen finally managed, his voice barely a croak. You just destroyed a greater demon and its horde, with one punch. The bald man turned to him, a flicker of something almost like concern in his eyes. "Oh hey, are you okay? You look pretty beat up. You should probably get that fixed." He glanced at Kaelin's bloodied uniform. "And your clothes are all torn. You know, sometimes they have sales on armor if you go to the right places." Kaelin didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The sheer absurdity of the situation was overwhelming. He had faced death countless times, seen horrors that would break lesser men. But this man, who casually obliterated demons while worrying about sales and dinner, was a terror all his own. He was an unknown factor, a glitch in the fabric of the galaxy, a power beyond understanding, and Kaelin, against all common sense, felt a strange sense of hope, or perhaps simply a profound sense of utter confusion. Then, from the smoke-filled skies, a new shadow began to fall. Not a demon, not a cultist. This was larger, infinitely more menacing, casting a pall that dwarfed even the city's tallest spires. A colossal, dark shape, segmented and angular, descended from the black void, its engines screaming a dirge that swallowed all other sounds. It was a vessel of war, impossibly vast, studded with countless turrets and launch bays, bristling with the iconography of the arch-enemy. An Abaddon-class battleship, a harbinger of true ruin, had arrived in low orbit, its weapons already charging, its primary guns focusing on the devastated ground below. The orbital bombardment would begin any second. The bald man looked up at the approaching warship, tilting his head slightly. "Huh," he said, a hint of mild surprise in his voice. "That's a big bug. What kind is that?" Kaelin's eyes widened in renewed horror. This was no mere demon attack. This was a full-scale invasion. The battleship was the hammer, and they were the nail. He had thought the situation couldn't get worse. He was wrong. "Get away from here," Kaelin screamed, pushing himself to his feet, ignoring the throbbing pain in his head. "That's a battleship! It'll glass the entire sector." The bald man just watched the battleship descend, his expression unreadable. "A battleship, huh? Does it have a discount section?" He wondered aloud, completely missing Kaelin's frantic warning. Suddenly, a communication squawked through Kaelin's ruined voxcaster, static-laced but undeniably urgent. It was an Imperial command channel, one he hadn't heard active for hours. "Anyone alive on Thonia Secundus? This is Battle Brother Valerius of the Ultramarines chapter. Do you copy? We are inbound, but caught in a warp storm. Estimate 1 hour until planetfall. Hold the line. Do you read, soldier?" Kaelin, stunned by the sheer defiance of fate, grabbed his voxcaster. "Valerius, this is Sergeant Kaelin. We are still here. But an enemy battleship is in orbit, targeting our position. And there's another factor." He looked at the bald man, who was still staring at the battleship, with the casual curiosity one might reserve for a particularly large bird. The battleship's primary cannons began to glow with a malevolent green light. The orbital bombardment was imminent. "Another factor, Sergeant." Valerius's voice crackled, laced with impatience. "Elaborate. What is your combat effectiveness? Can you suppress their ground forces for 1 hour?" Kaelin looked from the impossibly large battleship to the impossibly bored bald man. 1 hour against a full Chaos fleet. He let out a desperate, mirthless laugh. "Combat effectiveness." Kaelin yelled into the voxcaster, his voice cracking. "We have 1 man, Valerius. 1 man, and he just punched a hole through reality." The bald man, hearing Kaelin's voice, glanced at him. "A hole through reality? Is that what that was?" he asked, genuinely curious. "I just thought it was a shortcut." The battleship's weapons flared. A blinding cascade of green energy lancers descended from orbit, screaming towards their position. The ground trembled violently, the air superheated. Death was coming. Unavoidable, absolute death. Kaelin instinctively threw himself to the ground, shielding his head, bracing for oblivion. But the bald man merely stood, eyes still fixed on the incoming fire, a faint frown forming on his face. "Oh, that's just rude," he mumbled, as the first torrent of concentrated plasma energy slammed into the ground just meters away, ripping apart the very bedrock in an inferno of nuclear fury. The earth bucked, molten rock sprayed, and the scream of superheated air was deafening. Kaelin was deafened and blinded, the heat searing his face even from the relative safety of the crater lip. When he dared to look again, the world was a blasted wasteland. The battleship continued its relentless bombardment, each strike capable of wiping a small town from the map. But where the bald man had been standing, there was nothing. Just a smoking, glowing crater of fused rock. A surge of cold dread washed over Kalen. Had even he been annihilated by the sheer power of an orbital strike? Had he been just a fleeting, impossible dream in the face of the true horrors of the galaxy? Then Kalen heard a small cough. He peered through the dust and smoke, his eyes tearing up from the heat and debris. Standing at the very edge of the newly formed gigantic crater, amidst the ongoing bombardment, was the bald man. He was utterly unharmed, not even a speck of dust on his yellow jumpsuit. He was just dusting off his shoulder again. "Man, those guys are really messy," he said, his voice completely unperturbed amidst the ongoing apocalypse. He looked up at the battleship, which was still raining down death. A flicker of something other than boredom crossed his face. A spark of genuine irritation. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice impossibly loud, cutting through the roaring bombardment, aimed directly at the colossal warship in the sky. "Could you guys please stop doing that? You're making a huge mess, and I'm trying to find some crab legs." The battleship continued its bombardment, oblivious or uncaring. A new volley of plasma lances surged down, aimed directly at the bald man's position. The bald man sighed, a sound of profound exasperation. "All right, that's it," he muttered, his voice dropping to a dangerous, almost primal murmur. "No more, Mr. Nice Guy!" He braced himself, not against the incoming fire, but as if to deliver a punch of unimaginable power. Kalen watched, transfixed by the sheer, terrifying calm of the man. The glowing green lances of death struck the ground directly around him, erupting in blinding flashes of incandescent energy, tearing apart the very ground. But the bald man remained, a perfect, unmoving silhouette against the apocalyptic backdrop, utterly untouched. Then he unleashed a single, focused, furious punch towards the battleship. It was more than just a punch. It was a ripple in the fabric of reality itself, a single, unseen wave of concussive force, so vast, so potent, that it ripped through the atmosphere, through the void, and impacted the battleship with the force of 1,000,000 suns. The colossal vessel, which had shrugged off planetary defense lasers and orbital torpedoes, simply buckled, not exploded, not shattered, but buckled in on itself, like a tin can crushed by an invisible, impossibly strong hand. A deafening groan, not of metal, but of reality itself, filled the air. The battleship, moments ago a symbol of overwhelming power, began to tear itself apart, slowly at first, then with accelerating, cataclysmic speed. Sections of its hull peeled away like rotten skin. Internal explosions bloomed across its surface. Gravity emitters failed, and debris the size of hab blocks began to fall from the sky. The bald man watched, his expression now one of mild satisfaction. "See?" he said, glancing at Kalen. "I told them to stop. They just wouldn't listen." The battleship, a leviathan of war, continued its agonizing disintegration in the sky. It was a slow, majestic death, burning brightly as it plummeted towards the ravaged surface of Chthonius Secundus, threatening to complete the destruction it had begun. The sky, now a canvas of burning debris, signaled the end of the invasion, but also, perhaps, the beginning of something far more terrifying. Kalen could only stare. The raw, unfiltered power he had just witnessed was beyond anything known to the Imperium. A single man had just destroyed a Chaos battleship with one punch. The implications were staggering, terrifying, and utterly mind-numbing. He had just witnessed the impossible, not once, but thrice over. He felt the ground shudder as the battleship's massive wreckage began its final, terrifying descent. It was going to impact the planet with enough force to cause a localized extinction event. He didn't know what to do. His Voxcaster was dead. His squad was gone. His world was irrevocably shattered. The bald man, however, seemed to have already moved on. He turned from the burning debris in the sky and looked back at Kalen, a slight frown on his face. "So, he said, utterly oblivious to the impending cataclysm from the falling battleship. About those crab legs? You still haven't told me where to get them. Kalen stared at the bald man, then up at the burning, gargantuan silhouette of the battleship, now a death shroud tearing through the atmosphere. The heat was immense, the sound a roaring, tearing apocalypse. He could feel the ground vibrating beneath his boots, a deep, resonant hum that promised oblivion. Crab legs? Kalen choked out, the words barely audible over the infernal descent. His mind struggled to process the sheer disconnect. A man who had just destroyed a warship that could obliterate continents was worried about dinner. The bald man nodded, a faint frown creasing his brow. Yeah, you know, the ones with the red shells. Good with butter. He paused, then looked up at the falling wreckage. His frown deepened. Oh right, that thing. It's going to make a really big mess when it hits, isn't it? And it'll probably ruin all the local produce. Kalen felt a surge of hysterical laughter bubble in his throat. This wasn't happening. This was a fever dream induced by warp exposure. Ruin the produce? It's going to wipe out half the planet. That's not good, the bald man said, scratching his chin. He looked from the plummeting debris to Kalen, then back to the debris, as if weighing two equally annoying options. I guess I should probably stop it. Wouldn't want to cause any more trouble. Before Kalen could even begin to process the words, the bald man tensed. He didn't leap, didn't fly, didn't even visibly move. One moment he was on the ground, the next he was gone. Kalen's eyes struggled to track him, but it was like trying to follow a lightning bolt. A faint whoosh of displaced air was all that signified his departure. He was already in the sky, a tiny yellow speck accelerating upwards with impossible speed, a contrail of superheated air marking his ascent. He shot past the first, largest pieces of debris that would have obliterated a space marine drop pod, and kept going. Kalen could barely make out his form as he reached the main section of the battleship, a colossal mass of twisted metal and superheated plasma, still burning with residual warp energy. And then, he punched. It was not a punch aimed at destruction. Kalen, watching from the ground with his jaw scraping the dust, could only interpret it as an attempt to stop the momentum. The bald man's fist connected with the central, most massive section of the falling battleship, the part that contained its primary reactor core and void shields. The world held its breath. There was no explosion, no shattering of metal. Instead, an echoing, reverberating thump that seemed to shake the very stars. The colossal wreckage, which had been plummeting with the force of a small asteroid, visibly slowed, not just a little, but dramatically, as if hitting an invisible wall of force. Then, incredibly, it began to reverse direction. The battleship, a multi-kilometer long monstrosity, was being pushed back into orbit by a single punch. The sight was utterly, existentially terrifying. The sheer, incomprehensible power required to counteract the momentum of such a mass, to accelerate it back into the void, was beyond any scale Kalen understood. This wasn't just a powerful man. This was a force that defied physics, a living anomaly. The bald man, still a tiny figure against the burning backdrop, continued to push. Kalen saw his arm blur, a series of rapid-fire jabs, each one delivering an unimaginable burst of kinetic energy. With each strike, the monstrous wreckage accelerated upwards, a grotesque parody of its original ascent. Finally, with one last massive thump, the entire, fragmented hull of the battleship was propelled out of Chthonius Secundus's atmosphere, back into the cold vacuum of space. The sky, moments ago a canvas of fire and destruction, slowly began to clear. The terrifying roar of the descent faded into an unnatural silence, leaving behind only the distant crackle of ruined buildings and Kalen's own ragged breathing. Then, just as abruptly as he had left, the bald man returned. He landed with a soft thud barely 10 feet from Kalen, kicking up a small puff of dust. He dusted off his hands, then looked up at the now clear sky, a faint glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. "There," he said, his voice completely normal, as if he'd just tidied up a room. "That's much better. No more mess." He turned to Kalen. "So, about those crab legs. You were saying..." Kalen stared at him, speechless. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His mind had simply shut down, overloaded by the sheer impossibility of what he had just witnessed. He had seen a greater demon erased, an entire horde annihilated, an orbital bombardment shrugged off, and now a multi-kilometer battleship pushed back into space with bare hands. This wasn't strength. It was reality bending. "Hey, are you okay?" the bald man asked, tilting his head. "You look a little pale. Maybe you need some fresh air." Kalen finally managed to croak. You sent it back into space." "Yeah, it was going to make a huge dent in the ground," the bald man replied, shrugging, "and probably make it harder to find a grocery store. Anyway, I'm getting hungry." He paused, then his eyes widened slightly. "Oh wait, if it's in space, maybe it'll hit something else. Like another planet. That wouldn't be good, would it?" A rare flicker of genuine concern crossed his face. "I should probably go make sure it's not going to cause any more trouble." Before Kalen could even contemplate this new, terrifying implication, a familiar voice crackled through his voxcaster. "Miraculously still functional. Sergeant Kalen, this is Battle Brother Valerius. We are dropping out of warp space now, initiating planetfall procedures. Are you still alive? Report on enemy battleship status." Kalen instinctively grabbed the voxcaster, his hand trembling. His eyes darted from the device to the bald man, who was now looking up at the sky again, contemplating the trajectory of the battleship wreckage he'd punted into orbit. "Valerius!" "Yes, we're still here," Kalen yelled, his voice strained. "The battleship, it's gone!" A moment of static, then Valerius's voice sharp with disbelief. "Gone? Explain, Sergeant. Have you engaged its void shields? Did you manage to disable its weaponry? How many squadrons did you deploy?" Kalen swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on the bald man, who had now sat down casually on a piece of rubble, looking thoughtful. "No, Battle Brother, no squadrons. No void shields. It was handled. Valerius's voice was laced with growing impatience and suspicion. "By whom, Sergeant? What is your status?" "We are entering the upper atmosphere now. Scan results indicate complete devastation of your sector and anomalous energy signatures. What is going on down there? Is this a trap?" The bald man, hearing the increasingly agitated voice, looked over at Kalen, then at the voxcaster. "Is that your friend?" he asked, a hint of curiosity in his tone. "He sounds a little stressed." Kalen took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. "How did one explain this?" "Valerius, listen to me. The other factor I mentioned, he's here. He dealt with the battleship. He dealt with a Chaos battleship." Valerius's voice was dangerously low now, edged with suspicion. "Sergeant, are you compromised? Are you under duress? What is this other factor?" Just as Valerius spoke, a thunderous roar ripped through the atmosphere. The sky was suddenly alight with streaks of fire as 5 massive Ultramarines Thunderhawk gunships, their engines blazing, began their descent. They were clad in the iconic azure and gold, symbols of the Emperor's fury and justice. Kalen could make out their distinct shapes, their assault ramps already prepared, heavy bolters tracking the ground below. They were barely a minute out. The bald man looked up, his expression unchanging. "Oh, hey," he said. "Are those more strong guys coming? I hope they know where to get some crab legs." Kalen winced. "Valerius, they're here. The Ultramarines are here." "Affirmative, Sergeant! Prepare for ground support. We're coming in hot," Valerius roared. "Identify the other factor immediately and prepare to secure the area." The Thunderhawks landed with earth-shaking thuds, kicking up immense clouds of dust and debris. Their heavy bolters, surprisingly, were already trained on Kalen's position. From the primary Thunderhawk, a colossal figure clad in gleaming blue power armor, his helmet a grim skull, descended the ramp. He was a Space Marine captain, an Ultramarine of the highest caliber, radiating an aura of unwavering authority and barely contained fury. Behind him, 4 more Battle Brothers, equally imposing, formed a disciplined line, bolters raised. This was Battle Brother Valerius, and he looked less than pleased. He strode forward, his power armor's servos hissing softly, his heavy bolter held ready, his eyes glowing red through his helmet's optical sensors. Scanned the devastation, the pulverized cultists, the lingering warp residue, and finally settled on Kalen, then on the bald man casually sitting on a piece of rubble. "Sergeant Kalen," Valerius's voice boomed, amplified by his helmet's vox grill, cold and hard as ceramite. "Explain this devastation. Explain the lack of enemy forces, and explain him." He gestured with his bolter towards the bald man. "Who is this individual? He does not bear the markings of any imperial organization, nor is he on any known xenological registry." Kalen scrambled to his feet, wincing at the pain in his head. He snapped to attention, saluting sloppily. "Battle Brother Valerius, sir, Sergeant Kalen, Chthonian PDF, reporting." The devastation was the enemy. The cultists, the diamonds, and then the battleship, sir. All neutralized. Valerius's helmet tilted. "Neutralized? By whom, Sergeant? And how?" His gaze sharpened on the bald man. "Do not tell me this civilian is responsible." The bald man, now thoroughly aware of their presence, stood up and dusted off his yellow jumpsuit. He walked towards them, a faint, almost childlike curiosity in his eyes. "Oh, hey, are you guys going to help find dinner too?" he asked, his voice completely innocent. "I'm looking for crab legs. Do you know where I can get some around here?" Valerius and his battle brothers froze. Their red optical sensors narrowed. This was not the response they expected from a civilian caught in a war zone, let alone the potential architect of such devastation. "Civilian?" Valerius's voice was laced with utter disbelief. "Sergeant, what is the meaning of this insolence? We detected a warp signature of immense power that disappeared moments ago. We detected a colossal energy burst that neutralized a Chaos battleship. You claim this man is responsible?" Kalen nodded frantically. "Yes, sir. He eliminated the cultists with a single flick. He erased a greater demon with one punch. He shrugged off an orbital bombardment. And then he punched the battleship back into space, sir." A stunned silence fell. The Ultramarines, paragons of logic and martial prowess, stood utterly still, processing Kalen's impossible words. Valerius's helmet swiveled from Kalen to the bald man, then back again. "Sergeant," Valerius said, his voice now dangerously calm. "Are you suffering from warp exposure? Have you been psychologically compromised? No single unaugmented human could achieve such feats, not even a Primarch. Explain yourself, or face summary execution for insubordination and possible heresy." The bald man, seemingly oblivious to the tension, walked right up to Valerius, tilting his head. "A Primarch? Is that like a really good chef? Because I'm really craving some crab legs." Valerius's helmeted face, visible through the slight opening, was a mask of rigid fury. "Stand down, civilian. Identify yourself and your allegiance. Do you understand the gravity of your situation? You are in the presence of the Emperor's chosen." "Oh, I'm Saitama," the bald man said simply. "Just a hero for fun, and I'm really hungry." "A hero for fun?" Valerius repeated, the contempt in his voice palpable. "You stand amidst the ruins of a world. A battle brother claims you performed impossible feats, and you claim to be a hero for fun seeking crab legs. This is an affront to the Emperor's sacrifices." One of the Ultramarine battle brothers, unable to contain his disbelief, stepped forward. "Captain Valerius, this individual's presence is an anomaly. His power readings are non-existent, yet the evidence of his actions is everywhere. He must be a psyker of immense power, or a creature of the warp, cloaked in an illusion." Saitama, now looking a little bored, sighed. "Look, I just want to find a grocery store. If you guys aren't going to help, can you at least point me in the right direction? Or maybe let me go look for myself." This casual dismissal, in the face of their stern authority, was the last straw for Valerius. "Silence, anomaly. Your flippant attitude in the face of such devastation is proof of your malevolent nature. No true servant of the Emperor would display such disregard. I sense no malice from him, but neither do I sense any presence that could account for such power." "This is unprecedented!" "Battle brothers, prepare to subdue this individual. He must be contained and interrogated." The 4 Ultramarines immediately raised their bolters, their aim unwavering. The heavy weapons, designed to shred heretics and Xenos alike, hummed with suppressed power. Kalen gasped. "No, wait. Valerius, he's not an enemy. He saved us! He saved the planet!" Valerius ignored him. Sergeant, stand aside. You are dangerously close to treason. This entity's existence defies all Imperial dogma. He is too dangerous to be left unchecked. Saitama watched the Space Marines aim their weapons at him, a faint frown returning to his face. "Oh man," he muttered. "Are you guys going to be a problem too? I really don't want to mess up my suit again." "Do you resist, anomaly?" Valerius boomed, his bolter's muzzle flaring with contained energy. "Surrender now or face the wrath of the Imperium." Saitama sighed. "I just want to eat. Can't a guy get a break around here?" Before Valerius could give the order to fire, Saitama vanished. Not with a burst of speed, not with a flash of light, but simply gone. The Ultramarines, trained to react to the fastest threats, barely registered his absence before he reappeared. He was now standing directly behind Valerius, his hand lightly tapping the captain's shoulder guard. The Ultramarine captain, a veteran of 1,000 wars, tensed, every instinct screaming at the impossible intrusion. No enemy, no Xenos, no demon had ever breached his guard so completely, so effortlessly. His power armor, designed to withstand direct tank fire, hadn't even registered the approach. "Hey," Saitama said, his voice calm, right next to Valerius's ear. "Are there any good sales on vegetables around here? I was thinking of making a hot pot." Valerius spun around, his bolter swinging up in a lightning-fast arc. But Saitama was already gone, reappearing now a dozen feet away, casually looking at his fingernails. "I am not seeing any signs of a warp signature." "Captain," one of the Ultramarines voxed, his voice filled with an almost frantic disbelief. He is invisible to our sensors. His movements are beyond calculation." Valerius's helmeted face was a mix of shock and righteous anger. This was an affront, an insult to his very being. "Maintain firing positions. Do not let him escape. This being is a threat of galactic proportions." "Oh man, you guys are persistent," Saitama mumbled, a hint of genuine annoyance now creeping into his voice. "Look, I'm just trying to live a normal life. If you guys keep bothering me, I'm going to have to get serious." The implication, after everything Kalen had witnessed, was terrifying. Serious for Saitama meant the annihilation of everything. "Hold," Valerius barked, overriding his battle brother's firing protocols. He lowered his bolter slightly, his mind racing. This was not a foe they could simply outmaneuver or overwhelm with firepower. This was something else entirely. "Sergeant Kalen," he voxed, his voice still tense, but now tinged with reluctant curiosity. "You claim this individual saved you and this planet?" Kalen, still trembling, nodded vigorously. "Yes, battle brother, he truly did. Without him, we would all be dead. Chthonius Secundus would be a crater." Valerius looked at the devastated landscape, the craters, the residual energy signatures from the demon attack. He looked at the vast empty sky where a battleship had been moments before, and he looked at Saitama, who was now idly kicking a pebble, a picture of profound boredom. This defies all logic," Valerius finally admitted, a rare note of uncertainty in his voice. "Such power without the taint of chaos, without the mark of any known Xenos, it is an impossibility. Sergeant, you will remain here and give us a full debrief. Battle brothers, secure the perimeter. We need to establish a containment zone and relay this information to Macragge immediately." Saitama, hearing the word containment, looked up, a faint spark of irritation in his eyes. "Containment? You mean like a cage? No thanks, I've got things to do." "Like finding dinner?" Valerius turned to him again, his tone hardening. "Anomaly, you will cooperate. The safety of the Imperium depends on understanding your nature. If you are a force for good, then you will submit to our authority and our investigations." Saitama just sighed, a sound of profound world weariness. "Look, I'm really just a hero for fun. I'm not interested in being investigated or contained. I just want to find a good supermarket." Is that so hard? Suddenly the ground beneath them shuddered again, but this time it wasn't from an impact or a warp rift. It was a deep, sustained rumble, accompanied by a distant mechanical shriek. From the ravaged horizon, a new wave of enemies emerged. They were not cultists. They were not demons. These were colossal, multi-limbed war engines, the metallic behemoths of the Dark Mechanicum, foul engines of war, piloted by twisted tech priests. their arcane weaponry already charging. Behind them, swarms of Skitarii legions, their red robes fluttering, their galvanic rifles spitting lightning, advanced in disciplined but relentless formations. They numbered in the thousands, a horrifying tide of augmented flesh and bladed steel. Chaos reinforcements, Valerius roared, his voice cutting through the rising din, all thoughts of Saitama temporarily forgotten. They've brought heavy armor. Battle brothers, prepare for full engagement. Protect the sergeant. He holds vital intelligence. The Ultramarines immediately snapped into battle formation, their bolters unleashing a devastating volley of mass-reactive shells into the oncoming ranks of Skitarii. The Thunderhawks, still hovering, opened fire with their heavy cannons, spitting torrents of explosive shells. Kalen watched the new horror unfold. Even for Ultramarines, this was a massive force. This wasn't just a cleanup operation. This was a full-blown counter-invasion. Saitama, however, merely blinked. He looked at the approaching army, then at the frantic Ultramarines, then back at the army. A deep sigh escaped his lips. "Oh, come on," he muttered. "Seriously, more guys? Can't I just get 5 minutes of peace and quiet?" He looked at Valerius, who was already engaged in a furious firefight with a monstrous Castellan robot. "Hey, blue guy! Do you think they have any good sales on pre-packaged meals?" Valerius, blasting apart a Dark Mechanicum Skitarii vanguard with a single precise bolter round, ignored him. "Focus fire on the war engines. Their void shields are faltering!" Saitama just stood there, unmoving, as the battle raged around him. Lass fire, bolter rounds, plasma blasts, and arcane energy slammed into the ground, obliterating the ruins. Several stray shots, heavy enough to punch through ceramite, whizzed past his head, causing not even a flicker of concern. He watched the chaos unfold with a profound sense of weariness, like someone observing a particularly annoying traffic jam. Then, one of the colossal war engines, a Defiler, its demon-forged cannons blazing, turned its attention away from the Ultramarines and directly towards the lone bald man. Its main battle cannon, a weapon capable of liquefying a company of guardsmen, charged with a malevolent hum. Kalen screamed, "Watch out!" Saitama simply looked at the Defiler, then at the charging cannon. "Still with the noise," he said, shaking his head. The Defiler fired. A blinding, apocalyptic beam of raw energy, tainted with warp corruption, erupted from its cannon, screaming towards Saitama. It was a blast that would have vaporized Kalen and his entire platoon without a trace, shattered even Valerius's power armor. Saitama didn't move. He didn't even flinch. The beam struck him square in the chest. There was no explosion, no impact. The beam of energy simply dissipated. It washed over him, completely harmless, like a gentle breeze ruffling a leaf. Not a single speck of dust was disturbed on his yellow jumpsuit. He stood there, utterly unaffected, a placid island in a sea of apocalyptic destruction. The Defiler, as if realizing its futility, paused its assault. Its twisted demon brain seemed to short-circuit in confusion. Saitama, however, was no longer merely bored. A very, very faint twitch appeared in his left eye. He looked at his unblemished jumpsuit, then back at the Defiler. "You know," he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper, yet carrying across the battlefield with eerie clarity, "this is getting really, really annoying." He took a single step forward. It wasn't a charge, it was just a step. But the air around him crackled. The ground cracked beneath his foot. The very light around him seemed to dim, drawn into his presence. All noise on the battlefield, even the roaring war engines and the bolter fire, seemed to momentarily hush. The Ultramarines paused, their battles against the Skitarii momentarily forgotten as an inexplicable dread, primal and ancient, gripped them. They had faced terrors beyond mortal comprehension, but this was different. This was the quiet before a cataclysm. Saitama launched a single punch, not at the Defiler, but at the ground in front of him. It was not a directed attack. It was a release of pent-up irritation. The impact was beyond deafening. It was a sound that didn't just register in the ears, but vibrated through Kalen's bones, rattled his teeth, and threatened to tear his internal organs apart. The ground beneath them didn't just crack, It exploded downwards, creating a perfect, expanding crater, hundreds of meters wide, delving deep into the bedrock. A colossal shockwave, invisible but devastating, erupted outwards from Saitama's fist. It didn't just knock over the Dark Mechanicum forces, it pulverized them. The monstrous defiler, along with two other war engines nearby, were caught at the edge of the initial blast. Their adamantium hulls, their void shields, their demon-forged frames simply imploded. They folded in on themselves, compressed into singularities of scrap metal and demon flesh, then vanished into the newly formed crater. The thousands of Skitari legions, the hundreds of Cult Mechanicus tech priests, the entire vanguard of the Chaos counter-invasion were simply gone, swept away like dust motes by an impossible wind. Their weapons, their armor, their bionic enhancements were reduced to subatomic particles. The shockwave continued, unimpeded, tearing through the landscape. More ruins crumbled. New canyons were carved into the planet's surface. The Ultramarines, even in their power armor, were thrown off their feet, tumbling backward, their impressive bulk tossed like dolls. Their Thunderhawks were slammed downwards, their engines sputtering, their heavy armor groaning under the unseen pressure. Kalen, pressed flat against the ground, his ears ringing, watched in a horrified daze as the devastation spread. When the dust finally settled, revealing the scale of the carnage, a profound silence descended once more. The battle was over. The counter-invasion, which had numbered in the tens of thousands and boasted heavy war engines, had been wiped clean from existence. Saitama stood at the center of the newly formed, colossal crater, completely unharmed, a faint wisp of smoke curling from his gloved fist. He looked around at the pristine, untouched state of his yellow jumpsuit, then let out a long, slow breath. "Finally," he said, his voice still quiet, but now laced with a dangerous undertone of finality. "Now can I get some peace and quiet to find some crab legs?" Valerius, slowly picking himself up from the ground, his power armor dented, his internal Vox system crackling with static, stared at Saitama. His red optical sensors were wide with an emotion Kalen had never seen on a space marine. Raw, unadulterated fear, and something else, a dawning, terrifying comprehension. His battle brothers were similarly disoriented, their bolters lying uselessly beside them. One was attempting to reboot his vision systems, another was checking for structural integrity. Saitama turned to Valerius, his expression still one of profound, yet now slightly aggressive boredom. "So, any ideas on the crab legs?" Valerius stumbled forward, taking a shaky step. He looked at the colossal crater, the vanished army, the obliterated war machines. He looked at the bald man, who radiated no malice, no psychic signature, no evil, only an immense, almost divine, nonchalance. This is beyond anything," Valerius stammered, his voice uncharacteristically weak. You are a force of nature, an act of the Emperor's wrath perhaps, but your methods, they defy understanding." "Methods?" Saitama repeated, tilting his head. "I just punch things. It usually works." Valerius slowly, hesitantly, extended a hand, not in aggression, but in a gesture of surrender. "Acknowledgement. What do you want? Why are you here on Cathonia Secundus?" "I told you, I was looking for a convenience store," Saitama said, his irritation growing. "I ended up here by accident. Now, I'm just trying to get some dinner, and everyone keeps trying to fight me. It's really annoying." "A convenience store?" Valerius repeated, completely baffled. "On a demon world, sir, there are no convenience stores here, not anymore." He paused, then took a deep breath, collecting himself, the ingrained discipline of the Ultramarines reasserting itself even in the face of the impossible. "This planet is lost, anomaly. The warp has claimed it. We were here only to evacuate a handful of civilians and then to ensure no warp taint escaped." "Lost, huh?" Saitama mumbled, looking around at the ruins, a faint disappointment in his eyes. "So no crab legs then?" Kalen, slowly pushing himself up, felt a profound, almost insane surge of pity for Valerius. The Ultramarine's entire worldview had just been shattered. His tactical genius rendered utterly useless. His understanding of the galaxy turned upside down, all by a man obsessed with seafood. "Sir," Kalen said, his voice hoarse, Perhaps he could leave. We don't want to anger him further." Valerius shot Kalen a look that was a potent mix of gratitude and utter bewilderment. He turned back to Saitama. "Anomaly, your power is immense, unparalleled. We cannot contain you. We cannot fight you. We simply do not understand you." He took another breath. "If you truly mean no harm, if you simply wish to find sustenance, then we will not impede you. But this planet offers nothing but ruin." Saitama looked at the devastated landscape, then up at the dark, storm-racked sky that still pulsed with faint warp energy in the distance. He sighed again, a sound of profound disappointment. "No crab legs, no hot pot, no discount vegetables," he mumbled. "Man, this is turning into a terrible day. What about a good ramen place?" Valerius looked at Kalen, his red optical sensors seeming to plead for an explanation. Kalen could only shrug helplessly. "Sir, there are no restaurants either," Kalen said, trying to be as gentle as possible. "Not here. Not anymore." Saitama's shoulders slumped. "This is the worst trip ever," he grumbled. He looked at the Ultramarines, then at Kalen. "So, you guys don't have any food. You just want to fight all the time, and you don't even know where the grocery store is." He pinched the bridge of his nose. "Is there anything useful about you guys?" Valerius, despite his fear, felt a flicker of offense. "Useful, Anomaly? We are the Emperor's angels of death. We defend humanity from countless horrors. We are the bulwark against the darkness. And you can't even tell me where to get a good bargain on meat?" Saitama asked, utterly deflating. "What kind of heroes are you?" A new voice, sharp and authoritative, suddenly crackled over Kalen's voxcaster. It was not Valerius's internal comms, but a broader Imperial channel, one Kalen recognized as a sector command frequency. "Admiral Tyrus to all Imperial assets in Chthoniya sector. Warp storm has intensified. Naval forces are being pulled back to designated jump points. All planetary ground forces are to initiate immediate withdrawal. Chthoniya Secundus is being declared exterminatus candidate. Repeat, prepare for total planetary cleansing. No forces are to remain on world." Kalen's blood ran cold. Exterminatus, the ultimate act of Imperial desperation. The total annihilation of a planet, purging it with fire and atomics to prevent the spread of corruption. Valerius stiffened, his fear replaced by grim resolve. "Exterminatus," he boomed. "Sergeant Kalen, your Thunderhawks are not equipped for atmospheric departure. Battle Brothers, prepare for an immediate emergency warp jump. We must extract this sergeant. His testimony is vital." He turned to Saitama. "Anomaly, you must depart this world at once. It will be destroyed." Saitama blinked. "Destroyed? Like really destroyed? So, even if I found a grocery store, it would be gone?" "Yes!" Valerius shouted, his voice laced with urgency. "The entire planet will be annihilated by cyclonic torpedoes and virus bombs. Nothing will survive." Saitama frowned. "That's a bit much for a few cultists, isn't it? And all the demons are gone now, and the big bug that was in space." He looked around at the ruined but still existing planet. "Seems a bit overkill." "It is a necessary evil to prevent the warp's influence from spreading," Valerius retorted. "We do not have time to debate this. Sergeant Kalen, move." Kalen scrambled towards one of the Thunderhawks, his heart hammering. He looked back at Saitama. "You have to come with us. You won't survive an exterminatus." Saitama just shook his head. "I'm not really good with crowds, and I don't think you guys have any food. I'll just stick around and see if I can find a discount supermarket before everything goes boom. Maybe there's a hidden one." Valerius, seeing the bald man's baffling indifference, let out a frustrated growl. "You are suicidal, Anomaly, but we cannot force you. Battle Brothers, to your Thunderhawks." "Sergeant, with me." The Ultramarines quickly embarked into their Thunderhawks, their heavy armor clanking as they moved. Kalen, with one last desperate look at Saitama, climbed aboard Valerius's gunship. The ramp hissed shut, sealing them inside. Through the viewport, Kalen watched Saitama. The bald man was still standing amidst the wreckage, looking up at the sky, a slight frown on his face. He seemed utterly unconcerned. The Thunderhawk's engines roared, a sound of desperate escape as they clawed their way into the toxic, storm-racked sky. Kalen, pressed against the small viewport, watched the ground receding. The once great city, now a shattered husk, rapidly became a patchwork of shadows and dying embers. And there, a solitary yellow speck against the encroaching gloom, was Saitama. He hadn't moved. He just stood there, a peculiar monument to impossible power, looking up at the heavens as if expecting a delivery. Sergeant Kalen, brace for warp jump. Valerius's voice, now tinged with a desperate edge, cut through the comms. Atmospheric integrity failing. Planetary shields are down! The cyclonic torpedoes are inbound. Estimated impact in T-minus 60 seconds. The Thunderhawk lurched violently as it broke through the upper atmosphere, entering the bruised, swirling chaos of the warp storm that had trapped the Ultramarines. Kalen felt a sickening lurch in his stomach, the familiar, disorienting sensation of reality tearing. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to banish the image of the bald man, alone, facing utter oblivion. As the Thunderhawk prepared its desperate leap into the warp, Kalen risked one last glance out the viewport. The sight froze his blood. Streaking down from the black void, dozens of cyclonic torpedoes, dark lance strikes and virus bombs plummeted towards Chthonius Secundus. They weren't just aiming for the surface, they were aiming for the planet's very core, designed to trigger a catastrophic internal collapse, to sterilize every atom. The first cyclonic torpedo struck. It wasn't an explosion in the traditional sense. It was a rupture. The crust of Chthonius Secundus didn't just crack. It seemed to tear, exposing the molten heart beneath. A blinding flash of white-hot plasma erupted, expanding outwards at impossible speed, consuming everything in its path. The very air shrieked, compressed then atomized. This was a force designed to unmake worlds. Kalen heard a collective gasp from the Ultramarines in the gunship, even through their helmets. Their sensors, even from orbit, were being overwhelmed. The planet below was screaming its death throes. Then, the virus bombs hit, unleashing a torrent of bioengineered plagues that would consume all organic matter, reducing it to sterile ash and corrosive sludge in mere minutes. More cyclonic torpedoes followed, each one a hammer blow to the planet's already shattered form. The light from the dying world flared, a supernova of utter destruction. It consumed the entire surface, turning landmasses into oceans of fire, vaporizing mountains, boiling seas. The planetary shield, a testament to Imperial engineering, crumbled like sand, utterly useless. The air itself burned, then ceased to exist. Warp jump initiated. Valerius roared, his voice barely audible over the cosmic cacophony. "By the Emperor, she burns! Chthonius Secundus is no more!" The Thunderhawk shuddered, the reality outside the viewport distorting into a maelstrom of uncolors and impossible geometries. Kalen's last view of Chthonius Secundus was a sphere of pure incandescent fire, rapidly shrinking as they leaped into the warp. He closed his eyes. The image of Saitama standing alone amidst that impossible inferno burned into his mind. No one could survive that, not even the bald man. The journey through the warp was a blur of terror and nausea, the ship bucking like a mad beast. But eventually, with a bone-jarring lurch, they were spat back into real space. The cold, clear stars of the Chthonius sector greeted them, silent witnesses to the apocalypse they had just fled. Chthonius Secundus was gone. Where it had once been, there was now only a rapidly expanding cloud of superheated plasma and debris, slowly beginning to coalesce into an asteroid field, a dead world. Valerius, his voice grim, began issuing orders for the long journey back to Macraga, orders for reporting the loss of a world, the devastation of a sector, and the impossible mystery of the anomaly. Kalen sat slumped in his seat, utterly exhausted, body aching, mind reeling. He had survived. But at what cost? And what of the bald man? Days turned into weeks aboard the Ultramarine strike cruiser, Fist of Macraga. Kalen was debriefed relentlessly, his testimony recorded and cross-referenced with every sensor log from the brief engagement. He described Saitama's feats, the cultist annihilation, the demon eradication, the battleship reversal, the orbital bombardment shrug-off, the mass army vaporization. Each revelation was met with a mixture of disbelief, horror, and a growing sense of unease from the Ultramarine High Command. The existence of such a being, outside the Imperium's control or understanding, was a threat more profound than any chaos incursion. They spoke of containment, of research, of, if necessary, total eradication, but no one had any idea how. One day, Kalen found himself on a viewing deck, staring out at the uncaring void. The stars were endless, indifferent. The silence was absolute. He thought of Chthonius Secundus and the bald man. He wondered if he had been merely a hallucination, a figment of a dying planet's desperation. Suddenly, a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer appeared directly in front of the viewing pane. Not in the glass, but in the void outside the ship. Kalen blinked, rubbed his eyes, convinced he was finally losing his mind. But the shimmer remained coalescing. Then, with a soft pop that was entirely silent in the vacuum of space, a figure appeared. It was Saitama. He floated there, utterly unperturbed in his yellow jumpsuit, red gloves and red boots. He was completely unharmed, a placid expression on his face, as if he had merely stepped out for some fresh air. He looked at the vast gleaming hull of the ultramarine strike cruiser, then at the viewing deck, his gaze settling directly on Kalen. Kalen felt his jaw drop, unable to utter a sound. It was impossible. He had survived the exterminatus. He had just appeared in deep space. Saitama raised a hand, waving casually. He then pointed to a small, insignificant dent in the ship's adamantium hull, just a few meters from where he floated. Kalen's eyes followed his finger. The dent was tiny, barely visible, but it was there. Saitama mouthed something, too far away for Kalen to hear, but his expression was clearly one of mild complaint. He mimed a punch, then shrugged, as if saying, "Well, what did you expect?" Then he looked at the dent again, a faint frown on his face. He extended a gloved finger and, with a precision that defied logic, gently pressed it against the dent. The adamantium, which could withstand orbital bombardments, simply flexed under his touch, then smoothly popped back into place, leaving the hull completely pristine. Saitama nodded in satisfaction. He looked at Kalen again, gave another small wave, and then, with another silent pop, he was gone. Vanished. As if he had never been there at all. Kalen stood transfixed, staring at the perfectly smooth hull, then back at the empty void. His mind struggled to comprehend. He had survived. He had fixed a dent in a space marine battleship in deep space, and he hadn't even said anything about crab legs. A moment later, an alarm blared across the ship. Unidentified energy signature detected. Brief warp anomaly near viewing deck. Scans inconclusive. Initiate immediate investigation. Kalen merely stood there, a profound, almost spiritual calm washing over him. The impossible man, the anomaly, was still out there, a force beyond the Imperium, beyond chaos, beyond all understanding. And he was still just Saitama, a hero for fun, probably still looking for a good sail. The universe was a vast, terrifying place, full of unimaginable horrors. But sometimes, just sometimes, it held something even stranger, something so utterly absurdly powerful and mundane that it almost made sense. For the first time in a long time, Kalen felt a faint, bewildered smile touch his lips. The galaxy had just gotten a lot more interesting, and somewhere, out there, a bald man was probably still lamenting the lack of a decent supermarket. A few months later, on a quiet agri-world far from any warp incursions, Sergeant Kalen, now formally recognized and decorated by the Ultramarines for his impossible testimony, sat in a small, bustling cantina. He was on leave, assigned to a training cadre, a break from the constant war. He watched the local populace, mostly farmers and laborers, enjoy their simple lives. The sun shone, the crops grew, and the endless horrors of the galaxy felt a million miles away. He ordered a nutrient paste, a standard Imperial Guard meal, when his eyes snagged on a local news report flickering on a battered holoscreen above the bar. It was a mundane segment about food prices, and in other news, the chirpy local anchor announced, "The price of Chthonian crab legs has seen an unprecedented drop this cycle, following a sudden inexplicable glut in the market. Local suppliers are baffled, reporting vast quantities of the highly sought-after delicacy simply appearing in their processing plants overnight. Authorities are investigating, but for now, citizens can enjoy the biggest crab leg sale in living memory." Kalen choked on his nutrient paste. He looked at the holoscreen, then out the window at the peaceful, unsuspecting world. Somewhere, he knew, Saitama had finally gotten his crab legs, and probably he was already bored again, searching for the next good sale. The universe continued, oblivious, to the bald man who just wanted to live a normal life. And Kalen, the lone Imperial Guard sergeant who had witnessed the impossible, could only wonder what ordinary, utterly destructive desire Saitama would chase next. The galaxy, he realized, would never truly be safe or entirely predictable again.